Part 1. The stars looked different from up here. Captain Jake Morrison had been in space for 5 years now, but he still took a moment each day to just stare out at the endless black. Earth was far behind them, just another tiny dot of light among billions. The ship hummed quietly around him as it moved through space faster than anything humans had ever built before. Jake was 42 years old and had spent half his life preparing for this mission. The Valiant was one of Earth's newest exploration vessels, sent out to map the far edges of what humans called known space. But the truth was, humans didn't know much at all. They had been traveling among the stars for only 30 years, and in all that time, they had never met anyone else. No aliens, no other civilizations, nothing but empty planets and silent moons. That changed on a Tuesday morning. Ship time. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan was working at her station when the computer made a sound she had never heard before. She was 28, sharp as a knife, and she knew every beep and buzz the ship's systems could make. This was different. She pulled up the data on her screen and felt her heart start to beat faster. "Captain, you need to see this," she called out. Jake walked over to her station and looked at the screen. Numbers and symbols scrolled past, but Amy had already started to decode them. It was a signal, clearly artificial, clearly made by someone intelligent. And it was calling for help. "How far?" Jake asked. 3 days at full speed," Amy replied. "The signal is weak. Whatever is sending it might not have much time left." Jake made his decision in less than a minute. He knew that Earth's government had rules about first contact, about not getting involved in situations they didn't understand. But someone out there was dying, and the Valiant was the only ship close enough to help. "Set course," he ordered. "Full speed ahead." The next 3 days felt like 3 years. The crew prepared for anything. Weapons ready, medical bay cleared, translation software updated and tested. Nobody knew what they would find when they arrived. When they finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, they saw a planet that looked like it was dying. The world below them was covered in smoke and fire. Cities burned across the surface. Even from space they could see the destruction. "Scanning for life signs," said Lieutenant Peter Hayes from his station. Peter was the ship's second in command, a steady man who never panicked. But even his voice sounded shaky now. "I'm reading millions of them, but the numbers are dropping." "Can you identify the species?" Jake asked. "No match in our database. But Captain, I'm also reading another group of signals. Ships in orbit on the far side of the planet. They're armed." Jake's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a natural disaster. Someone was attacking this world. "Take us down," he ordered. "Find a safe landing zone near the largest population center. And keep our weapons ready." The Valiant descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere. The crew could see the destruction more clearly now. Beautiful buildings lay in ruins. What must have once been parks and gardens were now fields of ash. And through the smoke they saw people running, trying to find shelter from the ships that hunted them from above. The aliens were like nothing humans had imagined. They stood about 5 feet tall, with smooth gray skin and large eyes that seemed to reflect the light. They had 4 arms, each ending in delicate fingers that looked made for creating art or writing, not for fighting. When they saw the Valiant land, many of them stopped running and just stared. Jake put on his environment suit and headed for the exit ramp. Amy and Peter came with him, along with 4 security officers. They stepped out onto alien soil for the first time in human history. An old alien approached them slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. He wore robes that might have been beautiful once, but were now torn and burned. He spoke in a language that sounded like music and wind chimes. Amy's translation device went to work immediately. It would take time to fully understand the language, but the computer could make basic sense of it right away. "Please," the device translated. "You must help us. They will not stop until we are all gone." "Who is attacking you?" Jake asked, speaking slowly so the device could translate his words. "The Draviks," the alien said. "They came 6 months ago. They want our world for its minerals. We tried to reason with them, to offer them trade, but they do not want trade. They want everything, and they want us gone." "Why don't you fight back?" Peter asked. The old alien looked confused by the question. "Fight? We are Kalari. We do not know how to fight. We are builders, artists, teachers. War is not something we understand." Amy looked at Jake with wide eyes, a species that had never known war. It seemed impossible. Every civilization on Earth had known conflict. Fighting was part of human nature, woven into their history from the very beginning. "How many of you are left?" Jake asked gently. perhaps 2 million on this world. We were 15 million when the Draviks arrived. The number hit Jake like a physical blow. 13 million dead in 6 months, and these people didn't even know how to defend themselves. Before he could respond, alarms started blaring from the Valiant. One of the security officers pressed his hand to his earpiece and then turned to Jake with fear in his eyes. "Captain, we have incoming ships. 3 vessels, heavily armed. They're Draviks." The old Kalari made a sound of despair. "They have found you. They will destroy your ship for helping us. Please, you must leave. We cannot bear to have your deaths on our conscience as well." Jake looked up at the sky, where 3 dark shapes were growing larger. Then he looked back at the Valari, at the millions of innocent people who had never hurt anyone, who were being slaughtered simply because they couldn't fight back. He thought about the rules, about the orders from Earth to avoid getting involved. He thought about his crew, about the danger he was about to put them in. But most of all, he thought about what it meant to be human. Humans had fought thousands of wars throughout their history. They knew violence and conflict in ways these peaceful aliens never could. Maybe that knowledge, that terrible experience, could be used for something good. "No," Jake said firmly. "We're not leaving. Amy, get back to the ship and tell the weapons team to prepare for combat. Peter, start evacuating as many Kalari as we can fit into the cargo holds. We're going to show these Draviks that they picked the wrong planet to attack." The old Kalari looked at Jake with his large, expressive eyes. "You would fight for us? But you do not know us. We are nothing to you." Jake put his hand on the alien's shoulder, a gesture he hoped translated across species. "You're people who need help. That's all we need to know." As the Dravik ships descended toward them, Jake Morrison made a choice that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity was about to introduce itself to the universe, and they were going to do it the only way they knew how. The Dravik ships came down like falling hammers. Each one was twice the size of the Valiant, covered in dark armor that seemed to drink in the light. They moved with perfect coordination, forming a triangle pattern as they descended toward the human ship. Jake sprinted back toward the Valiant, while his crew worked frantically to load as many Kalari as possible into the cargo holds. The aliens moved quickly despite their shock, parents carrying children, the young helping the old. They had learned to run over the past 6 months. On the bridge, Amy had already taken her position at the weapons console. She had trained for combat scenarios back on Earth, but this was real. Her hands moved across the controls, bringing the ship's defensive systems online. "Shields at maximum," she reported. "Weapons charged and ready. But Captain, they outgun us 3-1. "Then we'll have to be smarter," Jake said, dropping into his command chair. "What do we know about Dravik's tactics?" "Nothing," Peter admitted. "We've never encountered them before." "Then we watch and learn. Keep loading refugees until the last possible second." The Dravik ship stopped about 1,000 feet above the ground, hovering in the air with technology that seemed impossible. A beam of light shot down from the lead ship. Not a weapon, but some kind of communication system. A voice came through the Valiant speakers, deep and cold, already translated by their systems. "Unknown vessel, you are interfering with authorized Dravik's operations. Remove yourself from this world immediately or be destroyed." Jake took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything that happened next would depend on what he said right now. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Valiant. We are rendering humanitarian aid to the Kalari people. Your actions here constitute genocide. We will not stand by and allow it to continue." There was a long silence. Then the Dravik's voice spoke again, and this time it sounded different. "Curious. Earth? We have no record of this world. You are unknown to the Galactic Consortium. State your species classification." Jake frowned. "Classification? We're human. We're from Earth in the Sol system." Another pause. "Impossible. There are no sentient species in that region of space. State your true origin or be destroyed as a threat." "We're telling you the truth," Jake said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We're human. We're from Earth, and we're not leaving. Then you will die with the prey species you defend." The communication cut off. The 3 Dravik ships began to move forward, weapons ports glowing with building energy. "All refugees aboard?" Jake asked. "Last group just cleared the cargo bay doors," Peter confirmed. "Then get us airborne. Now." The Valiant's engines roared to life. The ship lifted off the ground just as the Draviks opened fire. Energy beams tore through the space where they had been seconds before, turning the landing zone into melted glass. Amy returned fire, the Valiant's weapons lighting up the smoky sky. Their shots hit the lead Dravik ship's shields and scattered into harmless light. The shields didn't even flicker. Their shielding is way beyond ours, Amy reported. Our weapons aren't getting through. Then we make them waste their energy, Jake said. Evasive pattern delta. Keep them guessing. The Valiant twisted through the air like a bird dodging a predator. The Dravik ships pursued, firing constantly. But the human ship was faster and more agile. Jake pushed the engines to their limits, diving behind ruined buildings and weaving through clouds of smoke. The Draviks fought with perfect precision. Their ships moved in exact formation, their firing patterns calculated and efficient. They weren't trying to chase the Valiant so much as herd it into a kill zone where all three could fire at once. But Jake noticed something. The Draviks were predictable. Every maneuver followed a clear pattern. Every attack came from the optimal angle according to military theory. They fought by the book, and that book was written in their DNA. Amy, next time they fire, I want you to launch a full spread of missiles at the lead ship. Don't aim for the ship itself. Aim for the space right in front of it. That will waste our missiles, Amy protested. Trust me. The Dravik ships moved into position for another coordinated strike. Jake counted down in his head, 3, 2, 1, now. Amy launched 6 missiles at once. They streaked through the air toward the lead Dravik ship. The aliens immediately focused all their point defense systems on the incoming missiles, shooting them down one by one. The missiles exploded in a chain of fire and smoke. But Jake had already turned the Valiant hard to port, punching the engines to maximum. While the Draviks were focused on the missiles, the human ship slipped out of their trap and circled around behind them. They're regrouping, Peter said, but they look confused. That maneuver wasn't optimal. They don't understand why you did it. Because optimal isn't always right, Jake said. Fire everything we have at the rear ship. Full power. The Valiant's weapons hit the trailing Dravik ship from behind at point-blank range. The shields held, but they flickered and dimmed. It wasn't much, but it was something. The Dravik ships turned to face them again, but this time their formation was slightly off. They had expected the Valiant to run to try to escape. Instead, the humans had attacked. It was illogical. It was wasteful. It was not how prey species behaved. The battle continued for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Jake used every trick he knew, every unconventional tactic that Earth's military had developed over thousands of years of warfare. He was reckless when caution was called for. He retreated when he should have pressed the attack. He broke every rule of proper combat, and slowly, impossibly, the Draviks began to make mistakes. They anticipated logical moves that never came. They prepared for attacks that happened from unexpected angles. Their perfect coordination started to break down as they tried to predict an enemy who didn't think like they did. Finally, Jake saw his chance. The lead Dravik ship had moved too far forward, leaving a gap between it and its companions. It was a small error, the kind that might not matter against most enemies, but Jake wasn't most enemies. Full power to forward shields. We're going through. Through? Amy's voice rose an octave. Captain, that's suicide. Do it. The Valiant accelerated straight toward the lead Dravik ship. The alien vessel opened fire with everything it had, pouring energy into the human ship's shields. Alarms screamed across the bridge as the shields began to fail, but they held just long enough. The Valiant shot past the Dravik ship so close that their hulls nearly touched. Jake spun the ship around and fired point blank into the alien vessel's engine ports, the one spot where shields couldn't protect. The Dravik ship's engines exploded in a cascade of blue fire. The vessel began to fall from the sky, crashing into the ruins below. The other 2 Dravik ships stopped moving. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the communication channel opened again. Impossible, the cold voice said. But now it carried a hint of something else. Uncertainty. Prey species do not fight. Prey species do not win. Jake was breathing hard, his hands shaking on the controls. The Valiant's shields were at 7%. One more hit and they would be defenseless. We're not prey, he said quietly, and we're not predators either. We're something you've never encountered before. We're human, and we fight when we have to fight. The 2 remaining Dravik ships hung in the air, their weapons still charged. Jake waited for the killing blow. Instead, the ships began to rise back into orbit. This engagement is concluded, the voice said. The Draviks will analyze this encounter. You will be reported to the Galactic Consortium. They will decide what to do with your species. Then they were gone, disappearing into the smoke and clouds above. Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted. Around him, the crew slowly began to breathe again. Did we just win? Amy asked in disbelief. We survived, Jake corrected. But I think we just did something much bigger than win a fight. I think we just announced humanity's presence to the galaxy. 3 weeks after the battle, Ambassador Lisa Chen stood in front of a mirror in her quarters aboard the diplomatic ship Horizon. She straightened her suit for the 10th time, knowing it wouldn't help calm her nerves. In 2 hours, she would walk into a room filled with representatives from hundreds of alien civilizations. She would be the first human most of them had ever seen. Lisa was 51 years old and had spent her career negotiating treaties between Earth's various nations. She thought she understood diplomacy, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. The message from the Galactic Consortium had arrived 1 week after the Valiant's encounter with the Draviks. It was formal, carefully worded, and made one thing very clear. Humanity needed to explain itself. The consortium wanted to know what humans were, where they came from, and most importantly, how they had defeated a Dravik's battle group. Earth's government had chosen Lisa to speak for all of humanity. She had spent the flight to Zenith Prime, the consortium's neutral meeting station, studying everything the Valiant had learned about galactic civilization. It wasn't much, but it was enough to worry her. The galaxy, she learned, was very old. Hundreds of species had reached the stars over millions of years. They had developed complex systems of trade, territory, and law, and they had divided themselves into 2 clear groups, the Makers and the Born. The Makers were species who had used genetic engineering and biological modification to redesign themselves. Over thousands of years, they had rewritten their own DNA to become perfect at specific tasks. The Draviks had made themselves into ideal warriors. The Helion had optimized themselves for trade and mathematics. The Korthan had engineered their bodies to build massive structures in space without needing tools. The Born were species who had evolved naturally, without technological intervention. According to everything Lisa had read, Born species were weak. They were prey. They existed in the galaxy only because the Makers allowed them to, either as protectorates or as subjects. No Born species had ever developed space travel on their own. No Born species had ever fought back against the Makers. It was considered a law of nature, as fundamental as gravity, until humanity came along. A knock on her door pulled Lisa from her thoughts. Commander Peter Hayes stood in the corridor looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. "The shuttle is ready, Ambassador. It's time." Lisa took one last deep breath and nodded. "Let's go meet our neighbors." Zenith Prime was unlike anything Lisa had imagined. The station was enormous, a city in space that housed millions of beings. It orbited a blue star at the exact center of the galaxy, chosen specifically for its political neutrality. As their shuttle approached, Lisa could see ships from 1,000 different worlds docked at the station's countless ports. They landed in a bay reserved for diplomatic vessels. When the doors opened, Lisa got her first look at truly alien beings. The welcoming committee consisted of 5 individuals from different species. One looked like a living tree made of crystal that chimed when it moved. Another was a floating sphere of contained energy that communicated through patterns of light. A third appeared to be made entirely of liquid metal that flowed and shifted constantly. But it was the 4th being that held Lisa's attention. It stood 7 feet tall, covered in dark scales with eyes that glowed like hot coals. This was a Dravix, one of the species that had attacked the Kalari, the 5th being stepped forward. It was roughly humanoid in shape but seemed to be carved from stone that glowed with internal light. When it spoke, the words came from a translation device it wore around what Lisa assumed was its neck. "I am High Chancellor Drevok of the Galactic Consortium. On behalf of the member civilizations, I welcome humanity to the greater community. However, your arrival has raised many questions that require answers." Lisa bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that she hoped translated across species. "Thank you, Chancellor. I am Ambassador Lisa Chen, speaking for Earth and all humanity. We are honored by this welcome and ready to answer any questions you may have." "Then come," Drevok said. "The assembly awaits." The assembly chamber was breathtaking. It was a massive sphere, with seating arranged in rings that rose up in every direction. At the center was a platform where speakers stood. As Lisa entered, she saw hundreds of different beings in the seats, all turning to look at her. She was the center of attention for an entire galaxy, and the weight of it almost crushed her. Drevok led her to the central platform. When she stood there, her image was projected throughout the chamber so everyone could see her clearly. The chamber fell silent. Members of the consortium, Drevok began. We gather today to address an unprecedented situation. A new species has entered galactic space. They call themselves humans, and they claim to be from a world called Earth in an unmapped region of the Outer Rim. More significantly, this species engaged in combat with a Dravix military unit and survived. We must determine what classification this species holds and what role they will play in our community. Drevok turned to Lisa. Ambassador Chen, please tell us about your species. Are you makers or born? Lisa had known this question was coming, but her mouth still went dry. We are born. Humans evolved naturally on Earth over millions of years. We have not genetically engineered ourselves or altered our fundamental biology. A wave of sound swept through the chamber. Gasps, clicks, hums, and sounds Lisa had no words for. The beings around her were clearly shocked. A new voice spoke, and Lisa turned to see a Dravix representative standing. Impossible. Born species are prey. They cannot develop technology. They cannot organize warfare. They certainly cannot threaten maker species. You must be lying about your origins. Lisa felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. I have no reason to lie. We are what we say we are. Then explain, the Dravix demanded. If you are truly born, how did you develop space travel? How did you damage our vessel? Lisa thought about how to answer. She could talk about human history, about the long climb from stone tools to spacecraft, but she realized that wasn't what they needed to hear. They needed to understand what made humans different. We learned, she said simply. We learned everything. We learned to make tools and build cities. We learned to create art and write stories. We learned to fight wars and make peace. We learned science and philosophy and mathematics. We are not specialized. We are generalists. We can do many things reasonably well instead of one thing perfectly. A new speaker rose, a being that looked like floating jellyfish with bioluminescent patterns across its body. Generalists are inefficient. Specialization is the path to perfection. Every advanced species knows this. Why have you not optimized yourselves? Because we don't want to, Lisa said. We've watched our own history. We've seen what happens when we try to make people into perfect soldiers or perfect workers. It never ends well. We believe that being imperfect, being able to change and adapt is more valuable than being optimized. Drevok leaned forward with interest. You choose to remain unmodified? This is a conscious decision? Yes, we have the technology to change ourselves genetically. Some humans have even experimented with it. But as a species, we've decided that we want to stay as we are. Flawed, adaptable, and human. The chamber erupted in discussion. The representatives were arguing with each other in dozens of languages, their translation devices working overtime. Finally, Drevok raised a hand for silence. Ambassador Chen, the consortium requires more information. We need to study your species to understand this anomaly. We need samples of your genetic material. We need detailed records of your history and development. Lisa hesitated. Giving aliens access to human DNA felt wrong, but refusing might make humanity look like they had something to hide. We will share information about our species, she said carefully, but only if we can learn about yours as well. Knowledge should flow in both directions. Drevok's stone face was impossible to read, but he seemed to consider this. Agreed. The consortium will provide you with full access to our historical and biological databases. In exchange, you will allow our scientists to study humanity. Acceptable, Lisa said. However, Drevok continued, there is one more matter. The Kalari have petitioned to become a protectorate of humanity. They claim that your species saved them from extinction, and that they trust you to help them survive in a hostile galaxy. What is your response to this request? Dr. Henry Park sat in his laboratory aboard the research station Galileo, staring at two screens side by side. On the left was a complete genetic map of a human being. On the right was the genetic code of a Dravix warrior. He had been comparing them for 3 days straight, and what he found disturbed him more each hour. Henry was 39 years old, one of Earth's leading geneticists. When the consortium had agreed to share information with humanity, he had been chosen to lead the team studying alien biology. He expected to find differences. What he found instead was loss. His assistant, Dr. Julie Foster, walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was young, only 26, but brilliant. She had been the one to first notice the pattern they were now investigating. "Still at it?" she asked, handing him a cup. "Look at this," Henry said, pointing to the screens. "This section here controls emotional response. In humans, it's incredibly complex. We can feel hundreds of different emotions, often several at once. We can be angry and sad at the same time. We can feel guilty about being happy. It's messy and complicated." "And the Draviks?" Julie asked, though she already knew the answer. "They simplified it. See these genes? They're turned off. The Draviks can feel fear, but only enough to improve combat awareness. They can feel loyalty to their unit. But love, compassion, grief, joy, all of that is gone. They engineered it away." Julie sipped her coffee. "We knew they were designed to be warriors, but I don't think they understood what they were giving up," Henry said. He pulled up another image. "This is even worse. This section controls creativity and imagination. In humans, it's active all the time. We imagine possibilities, dream up scenarios that don't exist, create art and stories. The Draviks turned all of that off too. They can analyze tactics and follow strategies, but they cannot imagine something that has never been done before. That's why Captain Morrison beat them," Julie realized. "He did things that didn't make sense according to standard tactics. The Draviks couldn't predict his moves because they literally cannot imagine unconventional solutions." Henry nodded grimly. "Exactly. They made themselves into perfect soldiers according to military theory. But in doing so, they stopped being able to adapt when the theory doesn't apply." Over the next week, Henry and his team examined genetic data from dozens of alien species. The pattern repeated over and over. The Helion had optimized their brains for mathematics and commerce, but they had lost the ability to create art or appreciate beauty. The Korthan had enhanced their physical strength and stamina for construction, but they had reduced their emotional range to prevent psychological burnout from endless labor. Every maker species had sacrificed something to become specialized, and none of them seemed to realize what they had lost. Julie was reviewing historical records when she made another disturbing discovery. "Henry, you need to see this. I found records from the Helion species going back 12,000 years. Look at this." She pulled up images from ancient Helion history. The early Helion looked similar to the modern ones, but there was something different in their art and architecture. Their ancient buildings were creative and varied, showing individual style and artistic vision. Their old writings discussed philosophy, emotion, and the meaning of life. Modern Helion architecture was purely functional. Their writings focused only on efficiency and profit. Their art had become simple and repetitive. "They weren't always like this," Julie said quietly. 12,000 years ago, the Helion were like us. They felt everything. They created art for beauty, not profit. Then they started modifying themselves, and over generations they optimized away everything that wasn't directly useful for trade." Henry felt sick. They didn't just become something new. They erased who they were. They found similar patterns in every maker species with sufficient historical records. The Draviks had once been a species of explorers and philosophers who wrote poetry about the stars. The Korthan had been artists who built monuments to express their dreams, not just functional structures. All of them had chosen specialization. All of them had slowly erased the parts of themselves that made them complete beings. And after enough generations, they had forgotten they ever had those parts at all. Lieutenant Kevin Walsh was working on a different aspect of the research. He was a military historian, brought along to analyze combat data and tactical information, but he had stumbled onto something that connected to Henry's biological findings. Kevin was 41, a career officer who had studied every major battle in human history. When he compared human military tactics to those of the maker species, he found something fascinating. "The makers don't really have military history," he explained to Henry and Julie during a briefing. "They have military theory. The Draviks developed the perfect combat doctrine thousands of years ago. Every battle since then has followed that same doctrine. They don't evolve or adapt because their doctrine is mathematically optimal for most situations." "Most situations," Henry repeated, "but not all, exactly. Humans have terrible military doctrine compared to the Draviks. We're inconsistent, emotional, and we make mistakes all the time. But we learn from those mistakes. Every war in human history changed how we fight the next one. We adapt constantly because we have to. We're not optimal, so we have to keep getting better." Julie pulled up a comparison chart. "Look at this. The Draviks win about 95% of their engagements. But they've been winning at that exact rate for 3,000 years. Humans, according to our historical data, improve by an average of 3% per generation in military capability. We're not as good as the Draviks right now, but we're improving and they're not. Because they can't, Henry said. They optimize themselves for warfare as it existed when they made that choice. They literally cannot imagine fighting differently. The team continued their research, examining every aspect of Maker civilization. They found that the pattern extended beyond biology. Maker societies were stable but stagnant. The Draviks had not made a significant technological advancement in warfare for 500 years. The Helian economy had not changed its fundamental structure in a millennium. Meanwhile, human technology had advanced more in the last 30 years than in the previous century. Human culture changed constantly, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but always changing. Humans were chaos compared to the ordered perfection of the Makers, but that chaos was their strength. Henry compiled his findings into a report for Ambassador Chen and the consortium. His conclusions were stark. The Maker species had not made themselves stronger through specialization. They had made themselves fragile. They were like machines designed for one specific task, perfect at that task but useless for anything else. Humans were different. Humans were messy, conflicted, and imperfect. A human soldier could also be a poet. A human scientist could also be an artist. A human leader could be both ruthless and compassionate. This flexibility, this refusal to be optimized for a single purpose, was what made humanity dangerous to the established order. Because in a galaxy of specialists, a generalist could be anything they needed to be. Julie was working late one night when she found something in the oldest records the consortium had shared. It was a fragment of a text from a species called the Viridian, who had gone extinct millions of years ago. The text was philosophical, discussing the nature of sentient life. One passage made Julie call Henry immediately, even though it was 3 a.m. "Listen to this," she said when he answered, reading from the ancient text. "To become perfect is to become finished. To be finished is to be dead. Life is the endless process of becoming, not the achievement of being. Those who seek to perfect themselves seek their own ending." Henry was quiet for a long moment. The Viridian understood. They knew that optimization was a trap. And they still went extinct, Julie said sadly. Maybe they couldn't stop it. Maybe once a civilization starts down that path, it's almost impossible to turn back. But Henry wondered if that was true. Humans had the technology to modify themselves. They had the knowledge, but they had chosen not to. They had looked at the possibility of perfection and decided they wanted to stay imperfect. Maybe that choice, more than anything else, was what made humans unique in the galaxy. The warning came at dawn, Earth time. Admiral Carl Bennett was drinking his morning coffee at Fleet Command headquarters when every alarm in the building started screaming at once. He dropped his cup and ran for the command center, knowing that nothing good ever came from every system going off simultaneously. The main display showed exactly what he feared: a massive fleet emerging from hyperspace near Mars. Dozens of ships, all bearing Dravik's military signatures. But this time they weren't here to test humanity. This was an invasion force. Carl was 56 years old and had commanded Earth's defense forces for the past decade. He had spent those years preparing for the possibility of alien attack, even when everyone thought he was paranoid. Now he wished he had been wrong. "Get me a count," he ordered as officers rushed to their stations. 43 vessels, sir," came the response. "All heavy cruisers or larger. They're moving into attack formation around Earth. Scramble everything we have. I want every ship we can fly between them and our planet. And someone get Ambassador Chen on the line. We need to know if the consortium authorized this." The next 20 minutes were chaos as Earth's defense fleet launched from stations around the planet and moon. Humanity had 28 military vessels in total, most of them much smaller than the Dravik ships bearing down on them. It was going to be a slaughter. But Carl had not survived 2 wars on Earth by accepting defeat before the battle started. Commander Nina Ross was already in her fighter when the call came. She was 33, one of the best pilots in the fleet, and she had been flying combat simulations against theoretical Dravik's tactics for months. She had hoped never to use that training for real. "All fighters, this is Ross," she said over the squadron channel. "Stay loose and stay unpredictable. These bastards fight by the book, so we throw the book away. Make them think, make them guess, and make them pay for every inch." Her squadron launched from the carrier Destiny. 60 fighters against an armada. The odds were impossible, but Nina had learned something important from studying the Valiant's engagement. The Draviks were not invincible. They could be confused. They could make mistakes. She just had to survive long enough to exploit those mistakes. The Dravik's fleet moved forward in perfect formation, a wall of ships advancing on Earth like an iron fist. Their weapons powered up, preparing to sweep aside humanity's pathetic defense. Then Nina's squadron hit them from above and below simultaneously, fighters screaming in from angles the Draviks hadn't covered because they were not optimal attack vectors. The Draviks' point defenses opened fire, destroying 3 fighters in the first volley, but the rest scattered in random patterns, each pilot flying like their life depended on being unpredictable. Because it did. Nina locked onto a heavy cruiser and fired a full spread of missiles, then immediately dove away, spinning her fighter through a corkscrew pattern that no sane pilot would attempt near an enemy ship. The Draviks tried to track her, but their targeting systems kept losing her as she defied their calculations. Her missiles hit the cruiser's shields, doing no real damage but forcing the ship to divert power to defense. That was all she needed. While they were distracted, another squadron hit them from the opposite side, but it wasn't enough. The Draviks' fleet was too large, too powerful. For every small victory the human pilots won, they lost another ship. The defense line was collapsing. Then something impossible happened. Ships began emerging from hyperspace behind the Draviks' fleet. Lots of ships. But they weren't human. Carl stared at the display in disbelief. Are those Kalari vessels? Confirmed, sir. Also reading Helian ships, Korthan construction craft, and about a dozen species we don't have IDs for. They're positioning themselves between us and the Draviks. A communication came through from the lead Kalari ship. It was Elder Vormus, the same Kalari that Captain Morrison had saved weeks ago. Admiral Bennett, we received word of the attack on your world. We could not stand by and allow the species that saved us to be destroyed. We have brought what allies we could gather. Carl felt emotion rise in his throat. Elder Vormus, your people don't have weapons. You don't know how to fight? No, the old Kalari agreed. But we can stand in the way. We can make the Draviks choose between attacking you and attacking us, and perhaps that will give you time. The Draviks' fleet commander, a being named Zex, watched this development with something approaching confusion. His orders were clear. Test the humans again, and if they prove to be a threat, eliminate them. But now multiple consortium species were interfering, species that had never shown military cooperation before. This was not in any tactical manual. This was not a scenario his engineered mind could properly process. Zex opened a communication channel to the entire battle space. All vessels will withdraw immediately. This is a sanctioned Draviks military operation. Interference will be considered an act of war. Vormus responded, his musical voice somehow carrying steel underneath. Then it is war. The Kalari will not abandon humanity as you abandoned us to die. More voices joined the channel. A Hellion trader spoke up. The Helian Confederacy formally protests this action. Humanity has proven themselves worthy of consortium membership. This attack violates multiple treaties. A Korthan construction ship added its voice. The Korthan will defend humanity. We have studied them. They build with creativity and vision. We will not allow builders to be destroyed by those who only know destruction. Zex's carefully optimized mind struggled with this situation. The Draviks were perfect warriors. They had been engineered to fight without doubt or hesitation. But they had also been designed to follow protocols and respect consortium law. What was the correct action when multiple consortium species declared their intention to defend a non-member species? There was no precedent. There was no doctrine, and the Draviks could not function well without doctrine. While Zex hesitated, trying to calculate the correct response, Carl saw his opportunity. All ships, full offensive. Hit them now while they're uncertain. The human fleet surged forward, no longer fighting defensively but attacking with everything they had. Nina's squadron went straight for the Draviks' command ship, weaving through point defense fire that was a fraction of a second too slow because the Draviks were still calculating whether to fire on consortium species. Admiral Bennett's flagship, the Victory, charged directly at the Dravik center, its weapons blazing. It was a suicide run by any logical standard. But Carl had spent his entire military career learning that logic didn't always win battles. Sometimes courage and chaos were enough. The Draviks' fleet began to break formation. Ships moved to intercept the human attack, but they were no longer coordinated. Their perfect unity was fracturing, as individual commanders tried to respond to a situation their training hadn't prepared them for. Zex watched his formation collapse and felt something he had never experienced before. His species had engineered away most emotions, but they had kept one because it was tactically useful: the fear of failure. He was failing. Finally, Zex made a decision that would shock the galaxy. All Dravix vessels cease fire. Withdraw to high orbit. The Dravix fleet pulled back, their weapons powering down. Carl's officers looked at him in confusion, but he understood immediately. Hold fire. Let them go. The two fleets faced each other across empty space, neither attacking. The Kalari and their allies moved to form a wall between them, their presence making any continued combat politically impossible. Zex opened a direct channel to the Victory. Admiral Bennett, I request permission to speak with you directly. Granted, Carl said cautiously. A hologram of Zex appeared on the bridge. The Dravix commander was tall and powerful, covered in the dark scales that marked his species. But his glowing eyes showed something that Carl had not expected to see: uncertainty. Admiral, you are born, yes? You have not modified your species? That's correct, Carl confirmed. Yet you fight with coordination and strategy. You inspire loyalty in other species. You create tactics that our databases cannot predict. This should be impossible. Why? Carl asked. Because you decided born species can't do these things? Zex was silent for a moment. We were taught that born species are inferior, that only through engineering can sentience reach its full potential. But my fleet should have destroyed yours in minutes. Instead, you and your allies have forced us to retreat. Our doctrine does not account for this outcome. Maybe your doctrine is wrong, Carl said simply. Perhaps, Zex admitted. I cannot process this situation according to my training. I was created to follow orders and execute tactics. But the situation I face requires something more. It requires the ability to make decisions in uncertainty. This is not something I was designed to do well. Carl felt a strange sympathy for the Dravix commander. You were made into a perfect soldier, but soldiers need to be able to think for themselves sometimes. You can't engineer away judgment and expect to always make the right choice. This is a weakness in our design, Zex said, and he sounded almost sad. We believed we had achieved perfection, but you have shown us our limitations. The emergency session of the Galactic Consortium began 6 hours after the failed Dravix attack on Earth. Ambassador Lisa Chen stood once again at the center of the Great Assembly Chamber. But this time she was not alone. Elder Vormis stood beside her, along with representatives from the Helian, Korthan, and a dozen other species that had come to humanity's defense. High Chancellor Drevok looked different than he had during their first meeting. The stone-like being seemed somehow heavier, as if the weight of recent events had added actual mass to his body. The consortium faces a crisis unlike any in recorded history, Drevok began. A born species has not only achieved space travel, but has demonstrated military capability and formed spontaneous alliances with multiple member species. The Dravix attack on Earth, though unauthorized by this body, has revealed deep flaws in our understanding of galactic civilization. We must address these issues now, before they tear apart the order we have maintained for millennia. A Dravix representative stood, but it was not the cold, confident voice they had heard before. This Dravix sounded uncertain, almost hesitant. The Dravix Collective acknowledges that our assumptions about born species were incorrect. Fleet Commander Zex has provided detailed analysis of the engagement. His conclusion is troubling. The Dravix may have optimized ourselves into strategic inflexibility. We request permission to study humanity further, to understand what we have lost. Lisa exchanged glances with Vormis. This was not what she had expected. The Dravix want to learn from us? We want to understand how you retained capabilities that we engineered away, the Dravix representative clarified. Our warriors are physically superior to yours in every measurable way, yet you defeated us through means we cannot predict or counter. This suggests a fundamental flaw in our design philosophy. Another representative stood, this one Helian. The mathematical trader species spoke in precise, calculated tones. The Helian Confederacy has conducted economic analyses of human civilization. We find patterns that should not exist. Your markets are inefficient. Your resource distribution is chaotic. Your decision-making processes include emotional factors that reduce optimal outcomes. Yet your civilization continues to grow and adapt at rates that exceed our projections. We too request deeper study of your species. More voices joined in. The Korthan wanted to understand human architecture and creativity. The Valen wanted to study human art and culture. Even species that had not participated in the defense of Earth were curious about these strange-born creatures who defied every rule the galaxy thought it knew. Dr. Henry Park stepped forward at Lisa's gesture. He had been in the observation gallery, but his research was central to this discussion. If I may address the assembly? Trevok nodded. The human scientist may speak. Henry pulled up holographic displays showing the genetic research his team had compiled. We have spent the past month studying the biology and history of maker species. What we found suggests that the division between makers and born is not as absolute as you believe. Every maker species was once born. You all evolved naturally, developed sentience without modification, and built civilizations. Only later did you begin to engineer yourselves. He displayed images from ancient Dravik's history, showing their early art and culture. The Draviks were once explorers and poets. The Helion created beauty for its own sake. The Korthan built monuments to dreams, not just functions. You were not so different from humans. But over thousands of years, you optimized away the parts of yourselves that seemed inefficient. And in doing so, you lost the ability to adapt, to imagine, to grow beyond your programming. A wave of reactions swept through the chamber. Some species seemed offended. Others appeared thoughtful. A few looked disturbed, as if seeing themselves clearly for the first time. Are you suggesting we have damaged ourselves? Asked a Helion representative. I'm suggesting you made a trade, Henry said carefully. You became very good at specific tasks, but you lost the flexibility to be good at other things. Humans are not as good at warfare as the Draviks, not as good at trade as the Helion, not as good at construction as the Korthan. But we can do all of those things reasonably well, and we can switch between them as needed. Julie Foster stood next to Henry, adding her own analysis. We found something else in the historical records. Multiple extinct civilizations left warnings about the dangers of overspecialization. The Viridian wrote extensively about it before they disappeared. They understood that perfection and life are opposites. To live is to change, to adapt, to remain imperfect but flexible. Elder Vormis spoke up, his musical voice filling the chamber. The Kalari are a born species. We evolved naturally, and we never developed the technology to modify ourselves genetically. For millions of years, we believed this made us inferior. We accepted our role as prey, as beings who existed at the mercy of stronger species. But then humans came to our world. They fought for us not because we could offer them anything, but because we needed help. This is not a strategic calculation. This is not optimal behavior, but it may be the most important kind of behavior there is. Lisa took control of the discussion again. The consortium has a choice to make. You can continue to view the galaxy as divided between perfect makers and inferior born. Or you can recognize that perfection is a trap, that the ability to change and adapt is more valuable than optimization for a single purpose. What are you proposing? Drebok asked. Lisa took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been building toward. Humanity offers to share our genetic information, our history, and our knowledge freely with any species that wants it. Not to make you human, but to help you understand what you lost when you chose specialization. Some of you may decide you prefer to remain as you are, and that's fine. But others may want to reclaim some of the flexibility you engineered away. You would help us reverse our modifications? A Korthan representative sounded shocked. Why, what benefit is there for humanity? Because a galaxy full of rigid, unchanging civilizations will eventually stagnate and die, Lisa said bluntly. Because we believe diversity and adaptation are essential for survival. And honestly, because it's the right thing to do. You're people, even if you're not human people. You deserve the chance to be whole again if that's what you want. The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives argued with each other in dozens of languages. Some called Lisa's proposal dangerous. Others said it was the most important idea the consortium had heard in millennia. Finally, Drevok raised his hand for silence. This matter requires careful consideration, but I believe humanity has earned the right to make this offer. The real question is, which species will be brave enough to accept it? Over the next 3 days, representatives from various species met with human scientists and historians. They reviewed the research, examined the genetic data, and discussed what it might mean to reclaim the parts of themselves they had lost. The Kalari were the first to formally request help. They wanted to develop the capacity for self-defense without losing their essential nature as builders and artists. Human geneticists worked with them to design modifications that would give them better reflexes and strategic thinking, but without turning them into warriors like the Draviks. Then came a surprise. A small faction of young Draviks requested similar help. They wanted to feel the full range of emotions again, to create art, to imagine possibilities beyond combat tactics. It was controversial within Dravik society, but the fact that any Draviks were willing to consider it was revolutionary. Even some Helians showed interest, though they were more cautious. They wanted to explore whether they could retain their mathematical genius while regaining the ability to appreciate beauty and create art for its own sake. Commander Zex himself came to speak with Admiral Carl Bennett during this time. The two officers met in a neutral conference room, two warriors from species that had tried to kill each other days before. "I have spent my entire existence believing I was perfect," Zex said without preamble. "I was designed to be the ideal soldier. But in our engagement, I felt something I was not supposed to be able to feel. Doubt, uncertainty. And strangely, I found value in those feelings. They made me question my orders. They made me choose to withdraw rather than continue a battle that felt wrong." "That's called having a conscience," Carl said with a slight smile. "Is that what humans have? This ability to question, to choose, to act against your own interest because of moral considerations? More or less. It makes life complicated, but it also makes life worth living." Zex was quiet for a long moment. "I would like to learn more about this. The Dravik's High Command has authorized a small group of us to work with human advisors. We want to understand what we lost when we became perfect warriors. I think you'll find that being imperfect is harder than being perfect," Carl warned. "But it's also more interesting." Ambassador Lisa Chen watched all of this unfold with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Humanity had come to the stars expecting to explore empty worlds or, at best, encounter other civilizations similar to themselves. Instead, they had discovered a galaxy that had forgotten how to grow, how to change, how to be truly alive. Now they were helping that galaxy remember. It was a responsibility she had never imagined humanity would bear. High Chancellor Drevok,